Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth with your host, Dr. Joel Hunter.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. On today's program, we're going to be talking about empowering people beyond food insecurity. And our panelists are Dave Krupko, the CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank, and Ray Larson, Vice President of Collective Impact, the Heart of Florida United Way. Both of these guys are good friends of mine, longtime friends of mine. As a matter of fact, Ray was the one who recruited me to work with homelessness years and years ago.
The best thing I did.
So, first of all, let's get a scope of the kind of ministry we're talking about here. Dave, let me come to you first. I know that you supply food for nearly 600 outlets in 6 counties in Central Florida, and you're a part of an overall effort called Feeding America.
Yes, right.
How many pounds of food a year do you all distribute?
Well, in Central Florida, for the 6-county area, last year we distributed enough food for 58 million meals. It's just amazing that there's that much surplus food that would be wasted.
Yeah.
But it's just equally or more shocking that the need is there and we need to find additional food resources.
That is amazing. Now, let me stick with you just for a second. I know that both of your organizations are kind of at a ramping up to the next level point, and it was part of a brainstorming session with you, Dave, with Second Harvest as to, okay, what are besides simply supplying people with enough food or supplementing their food needs, what else can we do now that we've got these people who have turned to us? What else can we do to empower them? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. At Second Harvest, we've been feeding this line of people for 30-some years, and you need to feed the children so they can go to school and focus. You have to feed the senior citizens to remain healthy. You have to do that work day to day. But in addition, we've taken a look at going to why are they hungry in the first place? And it's primarily economic reasons or opportunity, lack of opportunity. So we're looking at not only feeding the line, but shortening the line. So how can we as an organization shorten that line?
Yeah.
And for the past 5 years, one example is that we run a culinary training and job placement program.
Right.
So when those people graduate, they can put food on their table for their family and be a role model to their children. And to date, we've graduated 250 people and have a 100% job placement rate. Wow. People are getting promotions. So many people just need a second chance. There's so much talent in this country that is not being realized, So that's one thing we're looking at. And then quickly, the other thing we're looking at is the health of these people. We have an obesity crisis. People that are hungry in America, they're not the ones that you look, the images of Biafra in Africa, with the ribs showing. But it's quite the opposite. But people don't have enough money to buy healthy foods. And so they're buying the cheap, high-starch, high-calorie in this vicious circle. So we're working directly with the healthcare industry right now, with Advent Health, Orlando Health, and providing nutritious foods along with nutritional education. And then we're going to be tracking those health outcomes. So very exciting.
I love one of the things you said when you talk about shortening the line. I was talking with a colleague the other day, and she said, we measure the wrong things. The metrics that are important is not how many people you're serving, but how many people you're not serving anymore. Who have you helped to independence? And better health, and these things beyond just the amount of food. Ray, let me come to you because you serve with an organization that is so important nationally. but so important here in Central Florida, United Way. And part of what you do is refer people to places where they can get food supplements and so on and so forth. But you're kind of leading an organization that many of us are familiar with, and that's 211.
Right.
And 211 is kind of the well-known source of reference.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody calls in to 211 and they say, I've got this problem. The person on the other end, ideally, would say, okay, go here.
Yep.
Tell us about how you continue to improve that system.
Well, I'll tell you from the very beginning, we've all been around for a while, right? And I remember as a young nonprofit exec, there used to be a book of resources, the agencies that help. And of course, the day you got it, that's the day it started to become obsolete because things would change. And we always dreamed that one day there'd be an opportunity where people could call and get the up-to-date information and the best places for them to go. And that wound up being 211. 211 simply is you dial 211 and you're connected with a well-trained specialist who will gather information about the issue. As Dave was talking about, they might call because they're having trouble finding food or might need utility assistance. And our experience is that no one has one problem.
Right.
That oftentimes there's a whole bunch of things going on in their lives. So that specialist will certainly work to help them solve or connect them to a place that can solve that problem, but also try to understand the other dynamics and give them the best referrals in our community to the places that can help solve their problem. Yeah. I'll share with you, sometimes when people get frustrated with 211, they'll say, well, 211 didn't solve our problem. And what that really is an indication is that we lack a capacity, we lack those services, or we lack those slots, or we lack those affordable housing areas, and there's just no one that can solve that problem right now in their community.
Let me ask you about both of you, and this is one of the reasons I admire you both. You don't just want to be about exchanging information or services or goods. You realize these are people.
Yep.
And to build something that gets to know the people you're actually serving and their lives, that's a huge challenge for huge organizations. What's the training you give to people who answer those phones that doesn't make them just sound like, for food, press one,
Right. Well, they do go through an extensive amount of training, and for the Orange, Osceola, and Seminole County, we take about 9,000 calls a month. And I'll share with you about 2,000 of those are crisis calls. Someone's in a real state of crisis, and about 200 are suicide prevention calls, people calling regarding. So, sometimes there is an issue, and you can make a referral. Like I say, that specialist is trained to first be empathetic, to listen, and also to ask probing questions of, well, how did you get in this situation? Has something happened? Did you lose your job? Did somebody get sick, or those sort of things? Because that's going to help us to be more responsive to them. And I'll share with you for those crisis calls, and particularly for those suicide calls, the typical call for 211 might last 7 to 10 minutes. One of those crisis calls or suicide calls can last an hour or longer. Yeah. I've had the experience of going into our break room, and I've had a busy morning. Somebody's there, and they say, how was your morning? And I say, it's been busy. I've had a lot to do. And I say, how was yours? I say, well, I just got off an hour-long call, and we were able to stop somebody from hurting themselves.
Wow. Yeah.
All to you.
Thank
right?
you.
All
yeah,
to
that's,
you.
yes. Yeah.
The other thing I'll just share with you real quickly is not quite as personal, but to try to understand the people we're working with. We've done some research, and we've identified a population that we call ALICE. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So individuals and families that don't have a lot of assets, so they can't sell something to help themselves. Their income, they're living day to day, and they're employed, they're working. Right. And what we have found that nearly half of the population of Central Florida fit into that area. And so they're just one.
Say that again.
About half of the population in Central Florida are ALICE, are people living paycheck to paycheck, oftentimes working more than one job, and are really one problem away from having real difficulty. So their car breaks down. They need their car to go to work, so they get their car repaired, but then they're having trouble paying their rent, or they're having trouble putting food on the table. And what we try to do is step in and stop that downward spiral and make it possible for them to continue. You may have seen the report from CNN. Over 40% of Americans can't handle a $400 problem. Wow. So if a $500 problem presents itself, then we need to have support in the community to help them get the food and to pay their rent and pay their utilities.
I'm just finishing a book called, the title is Made, and Stephanie, I can't remember her last name, but it's about the life of the working poor, brilliant woman, but the struggles that these folks face every day with the littlest, we wouldn't even think of it, but the question is always there. Can I afford that? And the answer is always, no. So, David, let me come back to you because I'm curious as to, I know that let me ask this before I go to Dave. Do you ever follow up with any of these calls? Yes,
we do with all of them, actually.
Okay,
so
great.
We'll follow up between 4 and 7 days afterwards and ask, did they get help, or can we do something else?
Oh, that's excellent. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you the same question, because you've got a lot, rather than calls, you have folks coming into all these distributed centers that help with resources. Are a portion of those capable of kind of getting to know the people and their situations and their families, or is it mostly transactional rather than relational? How does that work?
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of the food bank system. As Second Harvest, we're the distributor to the sub-district, the hundreds of emergency food pantries, shelters, soup kitchens, homes for abused women and children. So, we're providing the food to them, but they in turn have those relationships with the people that they're serving. They're developing those relationships. And many of those sub-distributors, or partner agencies, we call them, are providing additional services beyond just food. Okay, maybe they're helping them write a resume for a job interview, or getting them clothes for a job interview, or getting them transportation, things like that, or helping them maybe with a legal issue. A lot of them have a lot of legal situations going on. So that relationship is going, within the food bank, going back to our culinary training program, that we have a couple of social workers on staff, that there's this culinary training piece, but then there's the soft skill, how do you pick up a phone and have a conversation with a prospective employer? How do you dress for that job interview? How do you do that resume? And these social workers are also working with these students. They get to know them very well. And they are helping provide those wraparound social services that they need, like daycare. Or we had one student called, she was doing fabulous in the program, called up one day in tears and said, I got to drop out. I go, why are you dropping out? Well, my boyfriend kicked me out of my apartment last night. All my stuff was out on the sidewalk. And I can't continue. And our social worker said, listen, come in, and stay focused, and we're going to find you an apartment, So, there's a lot of that relationship building going on, where it's just not a vendor saying, hey, here's some food kind of deal, Let
me ask you both a question kind of out of the blue, because everybody knows someone, we have a listening audience who will be approached by a friend in need or a friend of a friend. What in the world are we going to do with this, person? And they can refer them to, maybe a food, some help with food, or 211, but it hasn't reached a place where they've got a specific, trauma. They're just floundering, and they want to know, how do I help this friend? How do I kind of stay in their lives and be a helpful voice, not try to run their lives, not try to manage their lives, but how can I be an encouragement and helpful and so on and so forth? Are there things that, you guys have been in this a long time, you've got all kinds of experience. How does that filter down to, I have a friend of a friend who just did get kicked out of their, or just, has gone through a job loss, or just lost their spouse, or just, all of these traumas that life has. I mean, that's, we can't look at it like something strange is happening to us, because that's basically what life is. But how would you advise people to approach someone who's going through a very difficult time? What are some general principles you would give them that might help them help their friend?
Yeah, a couple of different things come to mind. If there's not a family in the picture, okay, your family is your go-to, but a lot of them don't have those family relationships. And then hopefully they're part of a faith community, or if they're not, perhaps you refer them to a faith community that can help. Those are a couple of things. Or if there's an abuse situation, to refer them to a shelter, so they can get some safety there, or basically call the police to help them line it up. For a lot of people, it's a heart-wrenching thing, and it's like for an individual to say, "Oh, I'll get you a job." I mean, most people just can't do it. I'll find you a place to live. Right. Most people, in a small way. And again, food is at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. That hey, it's much easier. Maybe I can give them some meals, for a while. That's not going to cost a fortune, but they need that, to at least get some stability. So there's a lot of variations to that answer, to that question.
I think you partly answered the question by saying they have a friend. I think a lot of times when you're struggling, working one or two jobs, dealing with family, making these choices that nobody should have to make about whether I pay this bill this time or put food on the table or do those things, that there's a whirlwind there. And to have a friend that can help see beyond that whirlwind. When people do call 211, one of the things that the specialists will try to do with them is a little bit of problem solving. Again, because people start to panic and people get confused about what's the best step. So they'll listen and give feedback, but then they'll ask, are you a member of a faith community? Do you have family in town? Could you ask, this person to help you with those sort of things? I think having someone to speak to, because you're so busy taking care of your daily life that it's hard for you to see beyond that. And if nothing else, that offers a little bit of hope as well.
Exactly. And oh boy, that's the key word, isn't it? Because when you're going through any kind of pain, all you think is about pain. And you can't, you need someone to say, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. You've got to have that word of hope for folks.
And there's another great organization around that's doing phenomenal work, and that's Community Resource Network.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure you've talked about that. You could plug that, but I will for you. But the model is just genius. I mean, it's all based on relationships, building personal relationships, and coming alongside of them, not for an hour, not for a day, not for a week, but for an extended period of time. And for those volunteers that do that, to be trained appropriately.
Exactly. Well, both of you know, because you work with this population, that trauma and poverty and struggle are some of the most isolating dynamics in a person's life. Many people self-isolate. because they're ashamed, because they don't want to burden people, but the very thing we need is relationship. We've got to have community, which is why our faith communities are so important. Well, let me kind of go on from here. You're also a part of the larger region, a part of the larger. What about this region, Central Florida, kind of gives you hope going into the future?
Well, Dave gives me hope.
There you go. There you go. Good.
He's actually one of my
I like how this works.
There's a lot of great organizations in our community, and a lot of people trying to help. And I think that's part of the culture here. I think that's there. And I think we want to work together. And we've been at this a long time. There's lots of parts of that, but it's really trying to put a puzzle together that makes it so that all those different things. Like I say, very few people call 211 or contact one of our agencies and have one problem, and if you solve that one problem and take care of it, it takes a kind of braided services coming together. And I'll say the other thing is, I know Dave is in the same vein. I love this culinary training. We used to talk about wanting to lead to financial stability. And of course that's important, and we have to do that. But we got to start figuring out ways to make people financially mobile so that they can earn more and move out of this vulnerability and be able to take care of themselves. Over half the calls we get any month at 211 is first-time calls. And I think as Americans, we feel like it's our job to take care of ourselves and our families. And it's hard sometimes to ask for help. And what we find with that, though, is that sometimes people are a little bit further in the hole than if they'd called earlier. And we have to continue to send that message that the community is here to support and lift them up.
Yeah. Dave, how about you? What gives you hope about the future of our region?
I would have to just tag along with one of the points that Ray mentioned. It's collaboration among social service providers, not only just in the not-for-profit world, but including the local government has a seat at the table, whether it's a city level or at the county level. I mean, that's critical. We can't depend on the government for everything, and we shouldn't. And then there's the corporate entities. And Central Florida is a more collaborative social service area because I've worked around the country, and I've worked in areas where it's just dog eat dog. You wouldn't think that would happen, especially in the not-for-profit world. But in some markets it does. But this area, there's a lot of collaboration that occurs. And there's a vision to do more of it, and that's, there's some very good examples of that going around town that are creating real results by more nonprofits working together. It's this, and in your title, you could speak to this better, collective impact. And there's a lot of collaboration. That's good. We know each other. But we're all serving basically the same population. And we're doing this fine work over here, over here, over here, and over here. Well, why don't we do this and go, okay, let's focus on that individual, what the multiple needs they have. They need income or a job. They need health care. They need shelter. They need education, kind of thing.
And from the perspective of the person seeking help, it can seem like a real dilemma on where do I go and what do I do? Because there are things out there, but how do I make that connection and how do I, how do I do that?
Absolutely right. So I got a fun question for you. So you got this culinary program. Are you learning how to cook?
No.
Have you participated at all?
My wife says, why don't you go through that program? I go, I would love to, but there's
the schedule
just a little bit like that. I'm learning how to eat more. That's why I'm visiting the kitchen.
Ray, as you go through the Alice report and all of its implications, In Central Florida, we have a unique challenge in the way our economy is structured with the service sector and a lot of minimum wage jobs and so on and so forth. Do you have any recommendations of things that we need to look at as a
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Within the next 5 to 10 years, over 60% of the jobs in Central Florida are going to require some sort of post-secondary credential.
Wow.
That could be an academic degree, that could be an industry certification, that could be a number of different things. But a majority of the jobs in Central Florida are going to require some sort of post-secondary credential to go along with them. As we've been talking about the Culinary Institute, other opportunities, we have to get really intentional and make it possible for people to move up the salary chain by getting these credentials. I'll tell you a collaboration that we started that I think is really innovative. We're collaborating with Seminole State, and we have a program called Destination Graduation. And that's for low-income, non-traditional students at Seminole State. And I'll tell you, these are students that graduated from high school, probably against the odds. Mm-hmm. They've gotten themselves into a college, probably against the odds, and they're doing fine academically, but they have one of the problems, life happens, and my kids, I help them get through that problem. They're threatened to have to drop out of school.
Right.
And so we have a program that we partner with Seminole State, and oftentimes for a $600 solve, that person stays in school, gets their degree or gets their credential, and have a better chance of being able to provide for themselves.
I love it. Well, we're out of time. I hate this because I could talk about this all day and usually do. But thank you for what you're doing in this community, and
you're welcome.
And for people, it's making such a difference. And I want to thank you as well as our panelists, Dave Krupko, Second Harvest Food Bank, and Ray Larson with the Heart of Florida's United Way. Thank you for joining us on Power Talks. Remember, these discussions are just that. They're discussions among us, but we'd love to see you continue the discussions at home and go one step further. Get involved in any place you can, because when Power Talks, you're empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.
You just watched Power Talks, a Good Life 45 original production that makes you part of our Hope Team here on Good Life 45, where hope happens.